Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this presentation on German U-boats in World War II. Today, we'll explore one of the most feared weapons of naval warfare in the 20th century. The term U-boat comes from the German word Unterseeboot, simply meaning underwater boat or submarine. These vessels formed the backbone of Germany's naval strategy during World War II, particularly in the Battle of the Atlantic from 1939 to 1945. Their primary mission was straightforward yet ambitious: to strangle Allied supply lines by sinking merchant shipping faster than it could be replaced. The U-boat campaign experienced distinct phases throughout the war. The early period, known as the Happy Time by German submariners, saw tremendous success against unprepared Allied defenses. This was followed by an Allied counteroffensive featuring improved tactics and technology, and finally the collapse of the U-boat force as the war progressed. During our presentation, we'll examine the various U-boat types, from the coastal Type II to the revolutionary Type XXI, and explore their tactics, technologies, and the human dimension of submarine warfare. We'll also analyze how close Germany came to cutting Britain's maritime lifeline and how the Allies ultimately prevailed in this crucial campaign. The Battle of the Atlantic represented the longest continuous military campaign of World War II, running from the first day of the war in September 1939 until the German surrender in May 1945. At its core was a simple strategic calculus. Germany needed to sink more Allied shipping tonnage than could be replaced by shipyards. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat force, believed that if his submarines could sink 750,000 tons of shipping per month, Britain would eventually be forced to surrender due to starvation and lack of war materials. This tonnage war focused primarily on the vital North Atlantic routes connecting North America to Britain, as well as the dangerous Arctic convoys that delivered supplies to the Soviet Union. Despite their fearsome reputation, the U-boat force operated under significant constraints. Germany never had more than about 40 submarines operational in the Atlantic at any given time until later in the war. They struggled with limited range, inadequate air cover, and the need to surface regularly to recharge batteries. The acquisition of French Atlantic ports following the fall of France in 1940 significantly expanded the U-boat's operational reach. Bases at Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, Brest, and La Pallice allowed submarines to spend more time hunting convoys and less time in transit, increasing their effectiveness dramatically during the middle phase of the war. The early war period saw remarkable success for the U-boat force. From mid-1940 through early 1941, German submariners experienced what they called the Glückliche Zeit, or Happy Time, sinking Allied ships with relative impunity. During this period, convoys were poorly escorted, and Allied anti-submarine warfare technology was in its infancy. U-boats typically attacked on the surface at night, exploiting their low profile and the cover of darkness. This tactic allowed them to avoid detection by early ASDIC sonar, which was ineffective against surface targets. The submarines would infiltrate convoys, fire their torpedoes, and then escape in the resulting confusion. Following America's entry into the war in December 1941, U-boats enjoyed a second happy time, sometimes called Operation Drumbeat, or the American shooting season. American coastal shipping initially sailed without escorts or blackout precautions silhouetted against illuminated coastal cities. This made them easy targets for U-boats, which sank nearly 400 ships off the American East Coast during the first half of 1942. Throughout these successful periods, Admiral Dönitz coordinated operations from his headquarters, using radio communications to direct multiple submarines to converge on convoys in what became known as Wolfpack tactics. This coordination was initially secure thanks to the Enigma encryption system, though this advantage would not last forever. The German Navy deployed several distinct classes of submarines during World War II, each designed for specific operational requirements. Let's examine the four primary types that defined the U-boat campaign. The Type II was Germany's smallest submarine class, displacing only about 250 tons. These vessels were primarily used for coastal operations in the North Sea and Baltic, as well as for training new crews. With limited range and armament, they were not suited for Atlantic operations but served important roles in restricted waters. The Type VII became the workhorse of the U-boat fleet, with over 700 commissioned. These medium-sized submarines struck an effective balance between range, armament, and maneuverability. The Type VI-C, the most numerous variant, could operate throughout the North Atlantic while remaining relatively quick to dive when threatened. For longer-range operations, the Type IX was developed. These larger submarines could reach as far as the Caribbean, South American coast, and even the Indian Ocean. Their extended range allowed Germany to spread its naval campaign globally, though at the cost of decreased maneuverability and longer dive times. Late in the war, Germany introduced the revolutionary Type XXI electroboot, featuring greatly increased battery capacity and a streamlined hull designed specifically for underwater operations. These submarines represented a quantum leap in technology, capable of remaining submerged for days while maintaining good speed. Although they arrived too late to affect the war's outcome, they influenced submarine design worldwide for decades to come. The Type VII, particularly the VIIC variant, formed the backbone of the German submarine fleet. Of the approximately 1,150 U-boats built during the war, over 700 were Type VIIs. Let's explore what made this design so successful and widely produced. The typical Type VIIC displaced about 769 tons on the surface and 871 tons submerged. With a length of 67 meters and beam of 6.2 meters, it was relatively compact compared to modern submarines. This smaller size made it quicker to dive, typically 25 to 30 seconds to periscope depth, a crucial survival factor when aircraft appeared. For armament, the Type VII carried 5 torpedo tubes, 4 in the bow and 1 in the stern, with a total of around 14 torpedoes. Early in the war, these submarines also featured an 88mm deck gun for use against unarmed merchant vessels, though these were removed later as air surveillance improved. These submarines could travel approximately 8,500 nautical miles at 10 knots while surfaced, giving them good operational range in the Atlantic. However, submerged endurance was limited to about 80 miles at 4 knots before batteries required recharging, highlighting why U-boats spent most of their time on the surface when not actively attacking. Life aboard was extraordinarily cramped for the typical crew of 44 to 52 men. The submarine's strengths lay in its reliability, relative affordability, and balance of capabilities. As the war progressed, modifications included stronger pressure hulls, improved anti-aircraft armament, and the addition of snorkel breathing tubes to allow diesel operation while at periscope depth. The Type IX represented Germany's long-range submarine capability, allowing the U-boat campaign to extend far beyond European waters. These boats were significantly larger than the Type VII, displacing approximately 1,120 tons surfaced in the common 9C variant. With their increased size came substantially greater range, approximately 13,450 nautical miles at 10 knots, allowing operations as far as the Indian Ocean, South African waters, and the Caribbean. This extended reach enabled Germany to disperse Allied naval resources and attack shipping lanes worldwide. The Type IX carried 6 torpedo tubes, with a larger complement of torpedoes, typically 22, providing greater offensive capability during extended patrols. Early war variants also featured a more powerful 105mm deck gun for surface engagements against merchant vessels. These submarines participated in specialized long-distance operations like the Monsun-Gruppe, which operated from Japanese-controlled bases in the Far East, attacking Allied shipping in the Indian Ocean. To extend their range further, they were sometimes supported by Type XIV milk cow, submarine tankers that could refuel and resupply them at sea. However, the Type IX's advantages came with trade-offs. Their larger size made them slower to dive, with a larger silhouette both surfaced and at periscope depth. This increased vulnerability to aerial detection became increasingly problematic as the war progressed and Allied air coverage expanded. Despite these limitations, Type IXs achieved significant success against Allied shipping across multiple theaters. The Type XXI represented the most revolutionary submarine design of World War II, introducing concepts that would define submarine development for decades. Had it arrived earlier in quantity, it might have significantly altered the naval balance. Unlike previous designs optimized primarily for surface operation, the Type XXI was the first submarine specifically engineered for predominant underwater operation. Its streamlined hull and powerful electric motors enabled unprecedented submerged performance, about 17 knots underwater compared to the 7 to 8 knots of earlier types. The submarine featured greatly enlarged battery banks that allowed extended underwater operation. While previous U-boats could remain submerged for only hours at operational speeds, the Type XXI could maintain underwater operation for up to 3 days at 5 knots without surfacing. A built-in snorkel system allowed the boat to run its diesel engines while at periscope depth, recharging batteries without fully surfacing. Advanced sonar and hydrophone systems provided superior underwater detection capabilities, while a hydraulic torpedo reloading system permitted all torpedoes to be loaded into tubes without surfacing. To accelerate production, the Type XXI was built using modular construction with prefabricated sections assembled from 8 different shipyards. This industrial innovation allowed faster building times, but sometimes led to quality control issues. Although approximately 118 were completed before the war's end, only 4 actually conducted operational patrols, and none sank any Allied vessels. Despite this limited impact, the Type XXI directly influenced post-war submarine design worldwide, including the American Guppy program, Soviet Whiskey and Zulu classes, and British Porpoise class. The technological battle between U-boats and Allied anti-submarine forces shaped the campaign's outcome as much as tactics or numbers. Let's examine the key developments on both sides. Early in the war, German submariners were plagued by torpedo reliability problems. Magnetic detonators frequently failed, depth-keeping mechanisms proved unreliable, and sometimes torpedoes would run in circles, endangering the firing submarine. These issues were largely resolved by 1942, significantly improving combat effectiveness. As Allied escorts became more numerous and effective, Germany developed acoustic homing torpedoes like the T5 Zaunkönig, Wren, that could home in on the sound of escort propellers. The Allies countered with towed noise-making devices called Foxers to decoy these weapons away from ships. U-boat sensor systems evolved throughout the war. Passive hydrophones allowed detection of convoy propeller noise at considerable distances. As Allied radar became a threat, submarines added detection systems like METOX and later Naxos to warn when they were being scanned, allowing them to submerge before aircraft arrived. The Allied technological response was comprehensive. Centimetric radar small enough for aircraft installation could detect surface submarines at night or in fog. High-frequency direction finding, HF/DF or HUF-DUF, allowed escorts to locate U-boats from their radio transmissions. Improved sonar, the aircraft deployed magnetic anomaly detector, and weapons like the ahead-throwing Hedgehog mortar all increased hunting effectiveness. Perhaps most crucially, Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park eventually broke the Enigma cipher, providing advanced knowledge of U-boat positions and operational plans, intelligence known as Ultra. This information advantage, combined with technological superiority, eventually tipped the balance decisively against the U-boat force. The Wolfpack, or Rudel tactic, represented Admiral Donitz's most significant tactical innovation, transforming submarine warfare from individual stalking to coordinated group attacks. Let me explain how these operations typically unfolded. When Allied convoys were detected, the first U-boat would maintain contact while radioing the convoy's position, course, and speed to U-boat command. Dönitz would then direct all available submarines in the area to converge and form a patrol line ahead of the convoy's path. Once enough submarines, typically between 5 and 20, had assembled, they would attack simultaneously, usually on the surface at night. This mass attack overwhelmed the limited number of escort vessels, which could not respond effectively to multiple threats from different directions. After firing their torpedoes, the U-boats would disperse, reposition, and attack again on subsequent nights. This tactic proved devastatingly effective during the Middle War period, particularly against poorly escorted convoys. The Wolfpack approach maximized the impact of Germany's limited submarine numbers by concentrating force at critical points. However, Wolfpack tactics had a critical vulnerability. They depended on extensive radio communication. As the war progressed, Allied direction-finding technology allowed escorts to locate U-boats from their transmissions. Furthermore, breaking of the Enigma code gave convoy commanders advance warning of Wolfpack formations, allowing them to route convoys around known concentrations. By 1943, improved escort groups with radar, HF/DF, and effective tactics were actively hunting Wolfpacks rather than merely defending convoys. The Wolfpack era effectively ended that year as losses mounted, and U-boats were forced to operate individually and with much greater caution. May 1943 marked the decisive turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic, a month so catastrophic for the U-boat force that it became known as Black May. During this single month, 41 U-boats were lost, roughly 25% of Germany's operational submarine force, while Allied shipping losses dropped dramatically. This sudden shift resulted from the convergence of multiple factors. Very long-range aircraft, like the B-24 Liberator, finally closed the Mid-Atlantic Gap, an area previously beyond air cover where U-boats could operate freely. Small escort carriers now accompanied convoys, providing continuous air protection. Improved radar, sonar, and weapons gave both aircraft and surface escorts greater killing power. Allied escort groups had evolved from purely defensive formations to hunter-killer teams that actively pursued U-boats. The introduction of support groups, escort teams not tied to specific convoys, allowed sustained pursuit of submarines until destruction. The intelligence advantage provided by ultra-decrypts had become decisive, allowing Allied forces to avoid U-boat concentrations and vector aircraft directly to submarine locations. This combination of advantages forced Admiral Dönitz to temporarily withdraw his submarines from the North Atlantic in late May 1943. When U-boats returned to the battle, they faced an entirely transformed situation. Improved Allied technology and tactics had made the surface-running Wolfpack approach suicidal. The submarine force was now on the defensive, forced to spend most time submerged, with greatly reduced offensive capability and significantly higher casualty rates. This reversal highlights how rapidly the technological and tactical balance had shifted against Germany, transforming the U-boat from hunter to hunted in a matter of months. Life aboard a U-boat represented one of the war's most demanding environments, combining extreme physical hardship with intense psychological pressure. Let's examine the human experience of submarine warfare. Space constraints defined daily existence. In the common Type VI-C, approximately 50 men lived within a pressure hull, roughly the size of a modern bus. Sailors hot-bunked, with 3 men typically sharing 2 bunks in rotating shifts. Personal space was virtually non-existent, with sailors storing minimal belongings in small lockers or hanging from overhead pipes. Hygiene was rudimentary at best. Fresh water was strictly rationed for drinking and cooking, with little available for washing. Sailors might go weeks without bathing or changing clothes. The boat's interior quickly developed a characteristic atmosphere combining diesel fumes, battery gases, cooking odors, and body odor, a smell submariners called boat stink. The environment alternated between extremes: In northern waters, condensation created perpetual dampness with water dripping from cold metal surfaces. In tropical regions, interior temperatures could exceed 50 degrees Celsius, 122 degrees Fahrenheit, with humidity near 100%. Motion sickness was common during storms, with no relief possible. The psychological burden was perhaps even greater than the physical discomfort. Patrols typically lasted 6 to 8 weeks but could extend to 3 months. Tension alternated with monotony, long stretches of boredom punctuated by moments of extreme danger. The constant threat of depth charges, which could crush the hull instantly, created particular stress. As the war progressed, survival chances diminished dramatically. Of roughly 40,000 men who served in the U-boat force, approximately 30,000 never returned. A casualty rate of 75%, the highest of any military branch in the war. This grim statistic underscores the tremendous human cost of the submarine campaign. When we assess the U-boat campaign's ultimate outcome, we find a strategic failure that nevertheless left a significant technological legacy. Let's examine both aspects. Strategically, despite sinking over 2,700 Allied merchant ships totaling about 14 million tons, the U-boat campaign failed to achieve its primary objective of cutting Britain's maritime supply lines. Several factors explain this failure. First, Allied shipbuilding, particularly in American yards, eventually outpaced losses. By 1943, new construction exceeded sinkings, and the shipping deficit began to shrink. Second, Germany never deployed enough submarines simultaneously to establish the level of attrition Donitz believed necessary. Production priorities, technical limitations, and training requirements kept operational numbers below the 300 boats he estimated necessary for decisive victory. Third, the Allies developed an exceptionally effective anti-submarine warfare system combining technology, tactics, intelligence, and industrial production. This comprehensive approach ultimately overcame the U-boat threat through systematic countermeasures rather than any single wonder weapon. Despite this strategic defeat, the campaign's technological legacy proved significant. The Type XXI Electro Boot revolutionized submarine design worldwide. Its emphasis on underwater performance, streamlining, increased battery capacity, and snorkel systems directly influenced post-war submarine development in all major navies. The American Guppy program, Soviet Whiskey and Zulu classes, and numerous other post-war designs incorporated lessons from captured German technology. Even today's conventional submarines owe much to concepts pioneered in the final U-boat designs, making this perhaps the most enduring impact of Germany's submarine program. To properly understand the scale and impact of the U-boat campaign, certain key figures help put the conflict into perspective. Let me share some of the most significant numbers that define this naval struggle. Germany commissioned approximately 1,150 U-boats during World War II, though not all simultaneously. Of these, about 780 were lost to enemy action or scuttled by their crews at the war's end, a staggering loss rate of nearly 70%. At the campaign's peak in early 1943, Germany had approximately 240 operational submarines, though typically only about one-third were in actual combat zones at any given time. These submarines sank approximately 14 million gross tons of Allied shipping, about 2,700 merchant vessels, along with 175 warships. In human terms, roughly 30,000 merchant sailors lost their lives. The greatest monthly toll came in November 1942, when U-boats sank 134 ships totaling over 800,000 tons. The U-boat service itself suffered terribly. Of roughly 40,000 men who served, approximately 30,000 died, a 75% casualty rate that exceeded any other military branch in the war. Only 156 U-boat commanders completed more than 5 combat patrols, highlighting the high attrition among even experienced personnel. Leading this force was Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, who commanded the U-boat arm before eventually succeeding Hitler as head of state in the war's final days. Notable submarine aces included Günther Prien, the Bull of Scapa Flow, Otto Kretschmer, the highest-scoring commander with 47 ships, and Joachim Schepke, though many of these prominent commanders did not survive the war. These figures reveal both the campaign's massive scale and the tremendous human cost on both sides of this pivotal naval struggle. Certain episodes within the U-boat war stand out for their strategic significance or dramatic impact. Let's examine 3 particularly noteworthy events that shaped the campaign's course. In October 1939, just weeks into the war, Günther Prien's U-47 performed one of the war's most audacious submarine missions. Navigating through supposedly impassable defenses, Prien infiltrated Scapa Flow, the Royal Navy's main base in Scotland, and torpedoed the battleship HMS Royal Oak at anchor, killing 833 sailors. This shocking success provided an enormous propaganda victory and established the U-boat's fearsome reputation early in the conflict. Operation Drumbeat, Paukenschlag, in early 1942 represented perhaps the U-boat force's greatest success. Following America's entry into the war, Admiral Donitz dispatched submarines to the unprepared U.S. East Coast. Finding merchant ships still sailing independently with lights burning and minimal defenses, U-boats sank nearly 400 vessels totaling over 2 million tons in just 6 months, all while operating thousands of miles from their bases with minimal support. The contrast with Black May 1943 could not be more stark. In this single month, 41 U-boats were lost while sinking only 50 merchant vessels, an unsustainable exchange rate that forced Donitz to temporarily withdraw from the North Atlantic. This dramatic reversal resulted from improved Allied air coverage, escort tactics, and technology, marking the decisive turning point after which the U-boat force never regained the initiative. These episodes illustrate the campaign's dramatic swings of fortune, from spectacular German successes to eventual Allied dominance, and highlight how rapidly the naval balance could shift based on technology, tactics, and resource allocation. For those interested in exploring the U-boat war further, several authoritative sources provide comprehensive coverage of this complex campaign. Let me highlight some of the most valuable resources. Clay Blair's 2-volume history, Hitler's U-Boat War, represents perhaps the most thorough English-language treatment of the subject. Totaling nearly 1,800 pages, these books examine both the operational history and strategic context with exceptional detail and balance. For those interested in the dramatic early American phase, Michael Gannon's Operation Drumbeat provides an outstanding account of U-boat operations off the U.S. East Coast in 1942, analyzing both German successes and American defensive failures. Mark Milner's more concise Battle of the Atlantic offers an excellent overview of the entire campaign, firm on the Canadian contribution often overlooked in other accounts. For technical details and patrol histories of individual submarines, the website uboat.net has become an invaluable resource, compiling data from German archives alongside crew accounts and Allied records. When studying this subject, I encourage critical reading across multiple sources. Figures for tonnage sunk, submarines deployed, and other statistics often vary between accounts due to wartime reporting errors and differences in accounting methods. Where possible, could you cross-reference claims with primary documents to make sure you have the most accurate picture? The U-boat war remains one of the most extensively documented naval campaigns in history, with archives in Germany, Britain, the United States, and Canada holding vast collections of operational records, intelligence assessments, and personal accounts that continue to enrich our understanding of this pivotal struggle. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. You can use this if you so desire,